Boobs! Now that I have your attention, I need to give some backstory for this video. Years ago, back in high school, I sat next to one of my friends in physics class who loved anime, and he still does to this day. However, on this particular day, he was watching a show called Highschool of the Dead, and was watching this scene in particular. Now, he was curious if the, physics in this scene were realistic, and was very close to asking the teacher many questions about it in the middle of class. I eventually talked him down from it, but it was a funny memory that I still have to this day. However, he never got a real answer to any of his questions. So today, as his Christmas present and a present to the rest of my friend group, I will answer one of the questions he posed on that fateful day. Can boobs safely absorb the recoil of a gun, specifically in reference to this scene? As a disclaimer, I did a brief search online and didn't see anything specifically about what we're talking about today. So all the math and opinions you're about to see are 100% my own, for better or for worse. If my math is wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments below. In order to reach our answer, we need to first find two things. 1. Ray's breast size, as she's the one being used as a stabilizer, and 2. The amount of recoil that the firearm produces in a measurable unit of force. First, the gun. Because I'm a true red, white, and blue American, I know just by looking at it that's a Springfield M1A1 that normally fires .308 rounds. However, because we know that the owner of this gun operates with government permission and access to military-grade weapons, it's safer to assume that's actually using 7.62 by 51mm NATO rounds. These rounds weigh around 11 grams total with 175 grain. Grain, for all of you non-Americans watching, is the weight of the projectile, and just for reference, 1 pound equals about 7,000 grains. Larger projectiles usually require more gunpowder in the cartridge, which will affect its speed, force, and of course, recoil. Also, higher-end versions of this NATO round, which are likely the ones also being used in this scene, tend to have around 42 grains worth of powder within the cartridge. Springfield M1A1 Supermatch rifles can also weigh anywhere from 11 pounds to 12 pounds and 2 ounces, also known as 12.125 pounds. We'll be using the 12.125 estimate because we can clearly see this rifle is carrying a lot of modifications, so it's safer to assume that's on the heavier side of things. Not to mention, anyone who does know their guns can also tell you that heavier guns actually have less recoil transfer to your body because of Newton's third law. The recoil caused by the bullet has less force to transfer to the user if part of the force is used just to move the heavy gun itself backwards, while a lighter gun, that doesn't weigh as much, will likely transfer more force to the user as the weight doesn't slow it down as much. By the way, less force being transferred to poor Ray's melons also gives her the best chance of getting out of this without injury. With all of that being established, it's finally time to start doing the math. In order to calculate the recoil, we first need the velocity at which the gun is moving backwards. To do so, we'll use this formula. The velocity of the gun equals the weight of the bullet times the velocity of the bullet plus the weight of the powder times the velocity of the powder, all of it divided by the weight of the rifle times 7,000, which that bottom part, by the way, is specifically to convert the rifle's weight into grains. The bullet's projectile weight is 175 grain times its initial velocity of 2,600 feet per second, i.e. the speed at which these types of cartridges leave the barrel, plus 42 grains of powder in the cartridge times the velocity of the powder charge, which for almost all guns is 4,000 feet per second. Divide it all by the rifle's weight of 12.125 pounds times 7,000. 175 times 2,600 is 455,000, plus 42 times 4,000, which is around 164,000. Together they make 623,000, divided by 12.125 times 7,000, which equates to 84,875, ending with 7.34 feet per second as the gun's velocity. Now we will use the formula for kinetic energy to calculate the recoil. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 times mass times velocity squared, divided by 32.174 to convert it to feet-pounds because it's the American gravity measurement. Suck it, metric. In gun terms, its recoil equals the rifle's weight times the velocity of the gun squared, divided by 2 times 32.174. 7.34 squared becomes 53.8756, multiplied by 12.125 equates to 653.242 divided by 2 times 32.174, resulting in 653.242 over 64.348, equaling out to 10.152 feet-pounds or 13.764 joules of energy. That's enough physics. Now it's time for fun math, aka boob math. We need to find Ray's size. I watched the entire anime, and even with a very in-your-face fan service, I didn't find any mention of her height or bra size, so we're going to have to check elsewhere. It was at this moment that I began to ask myself, what's weirder? the fact that I'm trying to find the size of a fictional yet still very underage girl's breasts, or the fact that the fan wiki has already figured it out for me. Questionable research aside, thanks to some very dedicated fans, we know that Ray is a size E, aka 34 inch on bust size, 5 foot 4.5 inches tall, and 110 pounds. Finding the volume of breasts using just cup size and strap size is borderline impossible. Also, since I'm so ugly that no woman wants to be within 10 feet of me, even for the sake of science, we're going to have to make some estimations and assumptions. E-cups like Ray's on average can weigh anywhere from 1.5 to 3 pounds, and because Ray is gifted in the chest area, we're going to assume that she's on the higher end of that size, and that her breasts together weigh 3 pounds, with each individual one being 1.5. To calculate volume, the formula needed is volume equals mass times density. We're assuming that the mass is 3 pounds or 1,360.78 grams, and the density of human adipose tissue, which makes up the majority of tissue within breasts, averages out to be 0.9 grams per milliliter. Plug in the numbers and we end on 1,511.978 milliliters for the volume of tissue. With these numbers, we can now use them to apply the force on Ray and see just how much protection her breasts give her. With our newfound knowledge, we can determine that 13.764 joules of energy directly into her chest will not do that much. As anticlimactic as it may sound, it's nowhere near the 30 joules of energy needed to actually break her ribs. Ray should be fine, and the chest pain she complains about in following episodes should be bruises at most. Ignoring the injury from falling off the car and the deafness from being right next to a gun that's firing in her face, Ray recovering after a couple days actually tracks, so props to the author for getting it right. Her tits received roughly the same force as a typical paintball, meaning that all of you ladies out there who are gifted can indeed place an M1A1 Supermatch rifle to your chest and take the recoil without serious injury. I absolutely would not recommend it, because it'll leave a nasty bruise and it'll hurt like hell, but you can theoretically do it. Now I know some of you in the comments may say, "But Rambler, just to play devil's advocate, aren't you wrong because the MC isn't actually using her boobs to absorb the recoil? The gun is next to her breasts, but the direction of the recoil isn't actually pushing off of them. Rather, the magazine looks like it's pushing directly into her upper torso." And to that I say, that's ridiculous. If you actually watch the scene, you can clearly see that, apparently, I completely misunderstood this scene. Regardless, we can still see if this causes an injury. The M1A1 he's using has its magazine pressed right up against Ray's upper rib cage as opposed to her breasts, and there's not much between your skin and ribs. I'm an adult man and that barrier is thin. For a tiny 16-year-old like Ray, I'm sure it could be even less. And of course, before any of you say, "But Rambler, maybe his shoulder is taking some of the impact," I don't believe that for 1 second. This is the same man who can't even land shots with a shotgun from like 3 feet away. But you expect me to believe that he is properly handling the recoil on a much more advanced firearm? Yeah, right, buddy. However, having over 13 joules of energy almost directly into the rib cage from an object that is stronger than your bones still wouldn't break her ribs. Even if we assume the corner of the magazine is hitting her to give her the most force with the smallest surface area, it might cause a crack. Worst case scenario, the gun's angle is perfectly wrong and she has a minor crack in her ribs. Best case scenario, Ray walks away with a bruise. At the end of the day, Ray still survives, basically fine. It might feel odd that Ray won't endure any permanent injury, however, her not suffering any serious injury from the situation ends up making perfect sense when you really think about it. The M1A1 rifle was designed to be carried and used by individual people, and if its recoil was strong enough to break your bones, you'd be able to fire a few rounds before needing to go to the hospital. And I feel like we can all understand why a weapon that causes serious injury to the user is a pretty stupid idea. So, as strange as it seems, this outcome is actually what we should have expected from the beginning. Who would have guessed that the simplest answer turned out to be the correct one? Occam's razor strikes again. Time is a very limited resource, and I want to thank everyone who took time out of their day to watch this very strange video designed to answer a 7-year-old question about fictional titties. To the friends who've stayed with me throughout the years, I hope you enjoy this Christmas present. Thank you all so much for watching, and I promise you the next video will be a lot less weird.